On the morning of November 18, 1928, a young man named Adolf Sutro shook hands with a newlywed couple on a narrow beach deep inside the Grand Canyon and watched them push a homemade wooden boat back into the current of the Colorado River. He had spent one day with them. He would be the last person who ever saw them alive. Their names were Glenn and Bessie Hyde. They were on their honeymoon. Glenn was 29, a farmer from Idaho who had grown up running rivers and building boats with his hands. Bessie was 22, an artist from West Virginia, newly divorced from her first marriage, hungry for a life that felt like it mattered. They had met on a passenger ship a year earlier, fallen for each other fast, and married that spring. For their honeymoon, Glenn proposed something almost nobody had done. They would run the Green and Colorado rivers, by boat, straight through the heart of the Grand Canyon. If they made it, Bessie would become the first woman on record to complete the journey. Glenn wanted a speed record besides. He built the boat himself, a flat-bottomed wooden scow he named Rain in the Face, and in October of 1928, they set off. For a month it worked. They ran rapid after rapid. Glenn, at one point, was thrown from the boat and had to be hauled back in, a warning neither of them lingered on. Halfway through the canyon, they climbed out to the south rim to resupply, and there they met Emery Kolb, a photographer who had spent decades documenting the canyon and its rivers. Kolb offered them life jackets. Glenn turned him down. Kolb would say afterward that Bessie looked, in that moment, like a woman who was done, like she wanted to walk away from the river right there and never get back in the boat. She got back in anyway. The following day, they hiked back down to the water, and a young hiker named Adolf Sutro asked to join them for a stretch of the trip. He rode with them for one day, then climbed out at Hermit Creek and said goodbye. That was November 18th. Neither Glenn nor Bessie was ever seen again. They were due to arrive in Needles, California by early December. When no word came, Glenn's father took a train west, certain something had gone wrong. A search began, and it went on for weeks, covering miles of river that swallow search parties whole. On December 19th, more than a month after Sutro said goodbye to them, a search plane spotted something in the water nearly 70 miles downstream from where the couple was last seen. It was their boat. It was floating upright. It was fully loaded. Inside were their clothes, their food, Glenn's rifle, Bessie's diary, and a camera that would later reveal photographs taken just days before they vanished. Nothing about the boat suggested a capsize. Nothing suggested a struggle. The gear was packed the way two careful people would pack it before setting off again the next morning. And the two people who had packed it were gone, without a mark, without a body, without an explanation that has ever been proven in the 90-plus years since. That is the story that opens almost every account of vanishing in the Grand Canyon, and it opens this one too, because it captures something the rest of this film is going to spend the next hour trying to explain. A canyon a mile deep and 277 miles long does not need a monster. It does not need malice. It only needs two capable, experienced, well-prepared people to make one decision under one set of conditions, and it can erase them so completely that a boat can survive when the people inside it do not. The Hydes are the most famous name on a list that is much, much longer than most visitors realize. Since record-keeping in the canyon began in the late 1800s, close to 900 people have died within its boundaries. The most comprehensive account of that toll, a book compiled by an emergency room physician and a longtime park ranger, documents deaths from falls, from drowning in the Colorado River, from heat, from flash floods, from lightning, from plane and helicopter crashes, even from mule accidents on the trails. On average, roughly a dozen people die in the park every year. In some years, the number climbs into the high teens. Beyond the deaths, park rangers respond to somewhere between 250 and nearly 300 search and rescue calls annually, more than any other national park in the country. Some of those calls end quickly, with an exhausted hiker walked back to the rim on his own 2 feet. Some end the way Glenn and Bessie Hyde's story ended, with a search that runs out of leads and a case that is never closed. Here is the paradox at the center of all of it. The Grand Canyon does not look like a place that kills people. It looks like the safest wilderness in America. The rim is paved. There are gift shops, shuttle buses, and paved overlooks with guardrails. Toddlers in strollers get pushed along the same walkways as retirees on canes. It is, by any visual measure, one of the most tamed, curated, photographed landscapes on Earth. And that is exactly the trap. The canyon is what geologists sometimes call an inverted mountain. On a real mountain, the hardest, most dangerous part of any trip is the climb up, and it comes first, while your legs are fresh and your judgment is sharp. In the Grand Canyon, it is reversed. The descent comes first, and gravity does the work for you. The trail feels easy. The view is stunning. The temperature, 10 or 15 or even 20 degrees warmer with every 1,000 feet you drop, feels at first like nothing more than a pleasant warmth after a cool morning on the rim. By the time a hiker realizes the return trip is going to be the hardest physical thing they have ever done, they are already miles down, already hours into their water supply, already past the point where turning around is easy. The mountain punishes you on the way up, when you are strong. The canyon waits until you are tired, dehydrated, and out of options, and punishes you on the way out. To understand why so many people underestimate it, it helps to understand what the canyon actually is. The Colorado River has been cutting through this stretch of the Colorado Plateau for something like 5 to 6 million years, exposing rock layers that in places reach back nearly 2 billion years into the planet's history, some of the oldest exposed rock on the surface of the Earth. Indigenous peoples, including the Havasupai, the Hualapai, the Navajo, and the Hopi, have lived in and around the canyon for thousands of years, and several tribal communities still call parts of it home today. European-American exploration came late by comparison. John Wesley Powell's expedition ran the length of the canyon by boat in 1869, an expedition that itself nearly ended in disaster and cost several men their lives. Grand Canyon National Park was formally established in 1919. Within a decade, tourism was already booming. Railways were bringing visitors to the rim by the trainload, and the canyon had already claimed its first well-documented casualties. The draw has never really changed. People come for the scale of it. For a landscape so large it makes an afternoon walk feel like an expedition into deep time. What has changed is the number of people making that walk, and the confidence with which many of them do it. Picture the most heavily used trail into the canyon, the one most first-time hikers choose. It begins at the rim in a tunnel cut through sandstone, and for the first mile and a half, it feels almost like a park path. Switchbacks cut into red rock, mule trains passing with tourists riding down to the river, shade in the early morning before the sun climbs high enough to reach the trail. A rest house sits a mile and a half down, another 3 miles down. Many visitors turn around here, and they are the smart ones. Beyond that point, the trail keeps dropping. The shade disappears almost entirely by midday, and the temperature keeps climbing as the elevation keeps falling. By the time a hiker reaches the river, nearly a vertical mile below the rim, they have covered roughly 7 miles one way, and they are standing in a completely different climate than the one they left that morning. The rim might be a cool 65 degrees. The inner canyon, in summer, can be pushing well past 110, and every one of those 7 miles down has to be climbed again to get out. This is where the layered dangers begin, and they rarely arrive one at a time. They compound. The first hazard is almost invisible, because it isn't a hazard of terrain at all. It's a hazard of psychology. Hikers consistently misjudge how much harder the return trip will be than the descent. Rangers have a phrase for the pattern they see summer after summer. Hikers who feel strong and confident on the way down, who look at their watch, look at the trail ahead, and decide they have plenty of time and plenty of water to reach the river and come back before dark. The descent lies to you. Legs that feel fine walking downhill in the cool morning air are being lulled into a false sense of capacity that the same legs, dehydrated and heat-soaked, will not have 3 hours later going uphill. The second hazard is heat, and it does not behave the way most people expect heat to behave. This isn't a beach sunburn or a bad day at a summer barbecue. Inner canyon heat during the warmer months regularly exceeds 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and because the canyon walls trap and radiate that heat back onto the trail, temperatures at the bottom can run significantly hotter than the forecast for the rim above. Heat illness develops in stages: first cramps, then exhaustion, nausea, and confusion, and finally heat stroke, in which the body's cooling system fails entirely, and core temperature spikes to a level that can cause organ damage or death within hours if untreated. Park data consistently shows heat-related illness as one of the leading causes of search and rescue calls and fatalities in the canyon, and the years with the highest death tolls are reliably the years with the most extreme summer heat waves. The third hazard is water, or rather, the underestimation of how much of it a hiking body actually needs. In extreme heat, a hiker working hard on an exposed trail can require more than a gallon of water over the course of a single day, sometimes closer to 2. Many first-time visitors carry a single bottle. Rangers describe finding hikers who ran out of water hours before reaching help, who tried to ration what little they had left, rather than turning back the moment they realized they'd miscalculated. Dehydration accelerates heat illness, clouds judgment, and turns a survivable mistake into a fatal one with startling speed. The fourth hazard is the ground itself. Trail edges erode. Loose rock shifts underfoot. Many of the most severe falls in canyon history have not happened to reckless daredevils leaning over railings for a photograph, though that does happen, and it does kill people. Far more often, falls happen to hikers stepping just a few feet off a marked trail to get a better angle, to relieve themselves, to let another hiker pass. A few feet that, on canyon terrain, can be the difference between solid ground and a crumbling edge with no warning at all. Analysis of canyon fatalities over recent decades puts falls as one of the more common specific causes of death in the park, behind heat and cardiac events, but ahead of most other categories, and the data shows men dying in falls at nearly twice the rate of women, a pattern researchers attribute in part to risk-taking behavior near unprotected edges. The fifth hazard is water again, but a different kind: the river itself, and the flash floods that can turn a dry side canyon into a wall of water with almost no warning. Summer monsoon storms can dump rain on the plateau above the canyon miles from where a hiker is standing in bright sunshine, and that water funnels downward through narrow drainages with tremendous speed, arriving as a sudden surge that can sweep away anything in its path before a person even realizes rain has fallen anywhere nearby. And the sixth hazard is simply distance from help. Once a hiker is miles below the rim, in a slot canyon, or off the maintained trail system entirely, rescue is not a matter of minutes. It can mean hours of hiking by rangers, technical rope teams lowered by helicopter, or aircraft grounded by weather or darkness. In the most remote sections of the park, search efforts can stretch across days, weeks, sometimes far longer, before an answer is found, if one is found at all. These are not hypothetical risks stitched together for a script. They are documented, over and over, in real names and real dates. In April of 2017, a family was hiking in one of the most remote and beautiful backcountry areas of the canyon, near the confluence of Tapeats Creek and Thunder River, a spot popular with experienced backcountry permit holders precisely because it feels untouched. On a Saturday evening, the group needed to cross the creek. 62-year-old Lou Ann Merrill and her 14-year-old step-grandson, Jackson Standifer, were crossing together when they lost their footing in the current and were swept downstream. The rest of the hiking party triggered an emergency beacon, and within hours, a helicopter and ground teams were on scene. For days, rangers and search and rescue crews combed the creek, its confluence with the Colorado River and the surrounding terrain, using boats, a helicopter, and a drone. After 5 days of extensive searching, turned up no trace of either Merrill or Standifer, the park made the difficult decision to scale the search back to a limited operation. What makes this case distinct from so many others isn't the cause. Drowning in canyon waterways is tragically well documented. It's the reminder that being experienced, being with a group, and being equipped with an emergency beacon did not change the outcome once the current took hold. The lesson here isn't about preparation failing. It's about the water itself, which does not negotiate with skill level. Go back 60 years earlier to a very different kind of disappearance, one that shows the canyon's danger isn't only found on remote trails or in whitewater. In the summer of 1957, a 20-year-old woman named Mary Begay was working at one of the historic lodges on the South Rim. On the night of August 1st, she was reportedly seen getting into a vehicle with 2 men and was never seen alive again. More than a year later, in October of 1958, human remains were discovered just outside the park boundary, and investigators believed they belonged to Begay. Her case remains among the unsolved files the National Park Service still keeps open. It sits alongside the Hydes and dozens of others in a quieter, darker category. People who did not vanish because of heat, or a flash flood, or a fall, but because the canyon, like any remote place that draws thousands of strangers together every day, has also seen its share of violence that has nothing to do with geology at all. And then there is a case that shows just how long the canyon can keep its secrets, even when the story sounds, on its surface, ordinary. In May of 2012, a hiker named William Ott failed to return from a trip into the park. A multi-agency search was launched, covering the trails and terrain where he was believed to have gone, and it turned up nothing. No gear, no remains, no clear trail of where he had gone wrong. For more than a decade, his case sat exactly where so many others sit, open, unresolved, a name on a list, rather than a story with an ending. Then, in December of 2025, 13 years after he disappeared, members of the Hualapai tribe reported finding human remains in the general area where the original search had been conducted. DNA testing confirmed what investigators had long suspected but could never prove. The remains belonged to William Ott. Somewhere in that stretch of canyon, for 13 years, the answer had been sitting in terrain so difficult and so vast that a fully mobilized multi-agency search effort walked past it and never knew. That is the pattern across nearly every one of these cases, whether the outcome takes a week to resolve or 97 years and counting. The canyon is not hunting anyone. It has no intent, no malice, no pattern it follows. It rewards the cautious hiker who turns back at the halfway point with nothing more than a good story and sore knees. It can, with the same total indifference, take an experienced boatman on his honeymoon, a backcountry veteran crossing a creek she had crossed before, or a hiker who simply stepped a few feet off the trail to see something better. The danger here isn't a villain. It's scale, heat, water, and time, operating on a landscape that is almost 2 billion years old and has never once cared who was standing on it. That indifference is, in some ways, the hardest part of this story to sit with. Human beings are wired to look for a reason, a warning sign, a mistake we can point to and promise ourselves we would never make. Sometimes there is one, a hiker who genuinely did everything wrong, who ignored posted warnings, who set out at noon in July with a single water bottle. But the canyon's history is full of people who did almost everything right and still did not come home. And it is full of people who did almost everything wrong and walked out just fine. It rewards preparation and caution far more often than not. It just does not reward them every time. And the moment a person forgets that, the canyon is perfectly happy to remind them. Which is why the practical side of this story matters as much as the mystery. Park rangers and search and rescue coordinators say the same things year after year, and the data backs every one of them up. Carry far more water than feels necessary, especially in summer. Often close to a gallon a day for serious heat. More for strenuous hikes. Start early, before sunrise if possible, so the most exposed miles are covered before the heat peaks. Know that the return trip will always be harder than the descent, and plan turnaround times based on that, not on how good your legs feel on the way down. Stay on marked trails, and treat every unmarked edge as unstable, because so many falls happen exactly where a hiker assumed solid ground continued a few feet further than it did. Watch the sky, not just where you're standing, because flash floods begin with rain that can fall miles away and completely out of sight. Carry a way to call for help that does not depend on cell signal, since most of the canyon has none. And tell someone, in detail, where you are going and when you expect to be back. Because in a landscape this vast, that single piece of information is sometimes the only thing that turns a missing person case into a rescue, instead of a decades-long question mark. None of these steps guarantee anything. That is the uncomfortable truth underneath all of them. Lou Ann Merrill and Jackson Standifer were with a group. Glenn and Bessie Hyde were experienced river runners on a trip they had already survived for a month. Caution reduces risk. It does not eliminate it. What it does is tilt the odds. And in a place that swallows a dozen lives a year, regardless of who is careful and who is not, tilting the odds is the only real leverage anyone has. Back to that November morning in 1928. One more time. Somewhere below the Hydes' final campsite, in the 70 miles of river between where Adolph Sutro said goodbye and where a search plane finally spotted their empty boat, something happened that no searcher, no historian, and no investigator has ever been able to prove. Theories have multiplied for nearly a century. An accidental drowning, a fall from the boat while running a rapid, even the darker suggestion that the marriage itself had turned dangerous in its final days. None of it has ever been confirmed. What is confirmed is this: their boat was found intact, upright, fully packed, holding a diary that ends mid-story, and a camera holding photographs of two people who look, in every frame, like they still believed they were going to make it out. They didn't. And nearly a century later, nobody can tell you why. That is the Grand Canyon's oldest and most honest lesson. It is not a monster waiting behind a rock. It is simply larger, older, hotter, and more indifferent than almost anyone standing on its rim ever quite believes, until the trail down starts to feel a little too easy, and the trail back up reminds them exactly how wrong they were.